Hi, my name's Maribel. The night my husband called me a failure and threw me and our daughter out into the freezing rain, I thought that was the end of everything. All because of an old warehouse my grandfather left me. But what he didn't know is that the moment he slammed that door, he opened another one. Because when I stepped into that warehouse, I didn't just find shelter. I found a secret. One powerful enough to destroy every lie he ever told. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you right now? Tell me in the comments, because this story, it starts with rain, but it doesn't end there. The rain had been relentless all day, but now it sounded like bullets on the window pane. It blurred everything outside, driveways, cars, the neighbors' porch lights. The kind of storm that made even silence feel loud. I stood there, gripping the letter in my hand, the ink from my grandfather's signature still slightly smudged from where my fingers had lingered too long. I hadn't even finished reading it when Derek's voice sliced through the air behind me like a knife. "You're a failure, Maribel. You've embarrassed this family for the last time." I turned slowly. He stood by the hallway with his arms crossed, his eyes not even trying to hide the disgust anymore. Not disappointment, disgust. The kind that made you feel like dirt under someone's shoe. "You hid it from me," he said, jaw clenched. "A whole warehouse. Your grandfather left you that behind my back. What else have you been hiding, huh? Bank accounts? Lovers?" I could have laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he always accused me of the things he was probably guilty of. Derek had a gift for projection. He could turn any mirror into a window to my faults. "It was in the will. I didn't know until this morning," I said, voice steady. His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Don't play dumb. You think I don't see what this is? You think this makes you powerful now? Suddenly you don't need me?" He walked toward me, slow and deliberate, like every step was a punishment. I could hear Eleanor upstairs, her footsteps light as air as she moved closer to the staircase. My baby girl, probably holding her stuffed rabbit, watching quietly from the shadows like she always did when things turned ugly. "I built this life," Derek said, now inches from me. You've been home for 9 years. You raise a kid and play perfect wife while I make sure we have a roof. You think inheriting a rusty warehouse changes that?" He dropped the suitcase at my feet. "Take your charity and get out of my house." I looked down at the suitcase, mine, the blue one with the scuff on the corner from our trip to Austin 3 years ago. The same one I used to pack for his business retreats, while pretending not to notice the cologne that wasn't mine on his shirts. The world tilted. Not because of his words. I'd heard worse from him over the years. It was the finality. The way his voice didn't tremble. The way he meant it. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs now, holding onto the banister like she'd break if she let go. "Go to your mom," Derek said, not even glancing at her. I reached out my hand and she came down slowly, her steps unsure, like walking on ice. Her hand found mine, and she didn't ask anything. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. We stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a slap, and within seconds we were soaked. I gripped the letter tighter with one hand and reached into my coat pocket with the other, finding it without even looking. A white handkerchief, monogrammed with MC. My grandfather gave it to me when I was 21. Told me, "Keep this for when life gets too loud. Wipe the noise off your face." The fabric was nearly translucent now, drenched, clinging to my palm like it didn't want to let go. My hair plastered to my face, water running down my spine like tiny rivers of shame. The driveway lights flickered as I guided Eleanor to the car. She climbed into the back seat, curling into herself without a word. I slid into the front, turned the key, and the engine coughed like it had been asleep too long. It didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. For a moment, I sat still, letting the rain pound against the windshield, letting the silence fill the car. I could cry, I could scream, I could curse the universe for timing, for Derek, for everything. Instead, I pulled the letter back out and unfolded it. At the bottom was an address, some industrial block on the north side of Houston. I hadn't been there since I was a child, back when my grandfather still fixed vending machines and kept tools in coffee cans. At least I still have that, I whispered. 10 minutes later, after coaxing the engine with a silent prayer and one last turn of the key, the car started. I backed out slowly, wipers working overtime, headlights struggling to slice through the curtain of rain. We drove through neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years, places the new version of me wasn't supposed to go anymore, past rusted fences, gas stations with flickering signs, closed-up shops where ghosts might rent space for free. Eleanor was asleep before we hit the freeway. Her breath was steady, even, the way only children can sleep during storms they don't understand. The warehouse stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, behind a fence half-eaten by rust. It looked forgotten, like even time gave up on it. I parked under a crooked streetlight that buzzed faintly. I stepped out, rain immediately soaking through my boots. The lock was old, but it opened with the key from the envelope. The metal door groaned, a long, low sound like a warning. Inside, it was pitch black. I reached for the wall, felt the light switch, clicked it. Dim yellow bulbs flickered to life one by one, humming like they were waking from a coma. The room revealed itself slowly. Rows of wooden crates, dusty filing cabinets, a workbench still holding old tools, as if someone had just stepped out for lunch and never returned. I looked over my shoulder. Eleanor was still in the car, asleep. Then I saw something across the room, a shape covered in a large canvas. My heart thumped once, hard. I walked toward it, each step echoing louder than the last. My hand reached out, gripping the edge of the canvas. I pulled, and just for a second, I forgot the rain entirely. And just like that, everything. The wet clothes clinging to my back, the burn in my throat, the weight of what Derek had said, just paused, not gone, but held still like the whole building was waiting for me to notice it. The canvas dropped from my hand and fell softly to the ground, stirring a small puff of dust. The thing underneath wasn't terrifying, it was just a workbench, scuffed, sturdy, familiar in a way that hurt. Tools lay across it in tidy rows, untouched for years, but still lined up like my grandfather expected to come back and finish whatever he'd started. The air smelled like rust and forgotten years. I took a breath, finally. Real air. Not the recycled cold kind that came through the vents in Derek's house. This smelled like oil, old memories, something human. Behind me, the wind moaned through a crack in the metal siding. A flash of lightning lit the room for half a second, and in that brief glimpse, I saw color on the walls, paint, murals. I turned slowly. Faded images ran along the warehouse walls, logos, slogans from some long-gone vending machine company. But one mural in the center caught me. It was peeling badly, but I could still make out the smiling faces of young men and women in work uniforms. And there, standing in the middle, was my grandfather. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but what came was something quieter. That hollow pull in your chest when you realize you didn't say thank you enough, or sorry, or goodbye. I should have come back sooner, I whispered. Eleanor stirred in my arms. I walked her to a small platform made of crates and draped my coat over it. She rolled onto her side and mumbled through sleep. "Mom, is this our new home?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. While she slept, I wandered. The place was bigger than I remembered, and colder. Every step echoed. The lights overhead had burned out years ago, but lightning gave me glimpses. of dusty shelves, storage cabinets, paper files sagging from age. Then I saw it. On the main office desk, under a layer of dust, was a sealed envelope. My name, Maribel Crane, written in blue ink in a handwriting I hadn't seen in almost 20 years. I didn't move right away, just looked at it. Something about the envelope made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. When I finally opened it, my hands shook. Inside was a single brass key, slightly tarnished but still heavy in the palm. A folded paper accompanied it, blueprint paper, crisp and yellowed at the edges. There, circled in red pen, was a small section labeled Unit E. Tucked into the corner of the blueprint was a note, barely legible, "For when you finally come home." I turned slowly, flashlight in hand, scanning the wall behind the desk, and there it was, etched faintly into the concrete, just above an old switchboard, the letter E. I didn't know what to feel. I wanted to laugh at how dramatic it all was. I wanted to cry because it felt like someone had actually been waiting for me, not just leaving things behind to rot. But more than anything, I felt that weird prickle of something alive, like the building itself had lungs. I took the handkerchief from my pocket. It was still damp from earlier, but warm now from the heat of my body. Gently, I wiped the rain from Eleanor's cheeks and folded it around the key, tight, like wrapping a gift or a secret. "Some things," I said softly, "even time can't erase." I sat down next to Eleanor and rested my back against the wall. The warehouse groaned every so often, the kind of deep sound old buildings make when they remember they're still standing. My thoughts drifted to Grandpa Harold. He used to say things I never understood until now. "This place has bones," he'd told me once, clapping a metal beam like it was a friend. "And bones remember." Back then, I'd rolled my eyes, thought he was just an old man holding on to a dying business. Now I wondered if he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe I inherited more than a building. Maybe I inherited the strength I never knew I had. Maybe this place didn't just wait for me. Maybe it believed I'd come. I stood and moved deeper into the warehouse. The flashlight flickered, twice, before holding steady. The air felt thicker now, warmer, like something below was giving off heat. In the far corner, behind a stack of rusted vending shells, was a staircase. I wouldn't have seen it if the light hadn't landed on just the right spot. It was narrow and steep, leading down into darkness. I took a step closer. The floor under my feet vibrated, soft, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something mechanical still pulsing beneath us. My breath caught. "Grandpa, what did you leave me?" I stepped back from the stairs, heart pounding, knuckles white around the flashlight. The hum beneath my feet was no illusion. It pulsed with a rhythm too steady to be anything natural, too alive to ignore. I looked back toward the crates where Eleanor slept, curled up with my coat like it was armor. The warehouse above us had started to stir with faint light cutting through the broken panels. Dawn was coming, and I hadn't slept. I knew I had to go down there. Wrapping the handkerchief tighter around the key, I stepped onto the first stair. It creaked under my weight, sending echoes into the dark shaft below. I paused, took a breath, and kept going. Step by cautious step, the hum grew louder, vibrating up my legs like the building itself had veins. At the bottom, the flashlight flickered again. I tapped it lightly. It steadied. The hallway wasn't long, but it felt endless. Thick dust lined the floor, undisturbed for years. Then I saw it. An iron door at the far end, painted in faded gold. E. Crane Manufacturing, 1974. The key fit. The mechanism clicked once, then again, and the door gave with a groan. The air on the other side was cooler, cleaner somehow. Lights, dim but functional, flickered to life overhead. Inside were rows of machines covered in canvas, lined up like soldiers in a forgotten war. but it wasn't the machines that made my hands tremble. Near the far wall stood a large metal shelf lined with ledgers, blueprints, and 5 identical boxes, each sealed tight, each marked with my grandfather's initials, HC, all except one. The last box sat slightly apart from the others. Its label read, DS Holdings, Derek Shaw. My legs carried me to it before my brain caught up. I opened the lid slowly, heart thudding like thunder in my ears. Inside were folders, documents, invoices, wire transfers. I recognized the company name on each header, my grandfather's. I kept flipping through until one letter stopped me cold. A signed authorization, dated 3 months before Grandpa's stroke, granting Derek access to company accounts. I pressed my fingers to my lips, staring down at the evidence. The inheritance hadn't destroyed my marriage. Derek had been gutting it, stealing from it, long before I ever knew it existed. That's why he blew up. Not because I kept a secret, but because his secret had just come to light. Behind me, a cough echoed through the room. I turned sharply, ready to shield myself, but it was just an older man stepping into the light, hands raised. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, voice gravelly, slow. "Name's Landers. Used to keep night watch for your granddad." He wore a faded uniform with a patch that read Crane Security. I kept my grip on the flashlight, just in case. He nodded toward the shelf. "You're Harold's girl. You look just like him when he first came up with that bottling line. Eyes full of fire and nowhere to burn it." I didn't know what to say, he or ta. Reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old plastic key card. It looked like something from a bygone era. Across the front, Access, Unit E Control. He told me to hold on to this, said if anyone ever came down here looking for answers, they'd probably be carrying a white handkerchief. I looked down at the key wrapped in cloth, then back at him. Why would he think that? Landers didn't smile. "He built this place for you, Maribel. You just didn't know it yet." And with that, he tipped his hat and walked out the same way he'd come. I stared down at the card in my hand, thumb brushing its edge. The same fingers that once held a baby bottle now held the keys to something buried deeper than cement and steel. Legacy and loss both carried my initials. I sat for a while, trying to absorb it all. Then my mind drifted to the last time I saw Grandpa alive. He was in the hospital, tubes everywhere, eyes sharp despite the morphine. "Don't ever confuse quiet for surrender," he told me. "Some storms you don't fight, you outlast." Back then, I thought he was being poetic. But now, sitting in the center of everything he left behind, I realized it wasn't poetry. It was a plan. By the time I returned to the upper floor, the light had fully broken through the high windows. Dust sparkled in sunbeams. I rubbed my eyes and looked toward the crates. Eleanor was awake, kneeling by a stack of old photos she must have pulled from a broken file box nearby. She held one up to the light. "Mom," she said softly, "why is Dad in this picture?" I froze. She handed it to me, her little fingers smudged with dust. There he was, Derek, standing beside my grandfather, both of them smiling like they'd just sealed a deal. He wasn't just a stranger who married into my life. He had been here. He had been here long before I ever knew him. The photo in my hand felt heavier than the paper it sat on. Derek's grin side by side with my grandfather's, both of them looking like partners in something that had nothing to do with me. I set it down slowly on the desk and let the silence grow around it. 2 days later, the rain had scrubbed the city clean. The sun sat low and warm, turning the warehouse windows into panels of gold. Dust motes floated in the beams like small, patient stars. From where I sat, surrounded by ledgers and yellowing invoices, the room felt suspended, calm but loaded, like a theater before the first line. Eleanor was at my feet, tracing a name on the edge of a photograph with a finger. She'd stalked through boxes and found memories like a child finding treasure. She still looked small to be holding so much of our past. My phone buzzed against the wood. I let it ring until the second tone, then picked it up. Ruth Ann's name lit the screen like a welcome signal. "Where are you?" she asked as soon as I answered, voice bright but curious. "Your socials are a mess. People are asking." "I'm at the warehouse," I said. "Come by if you can." She arrived within the hour, breathless from parking too far and apologetic about her camera bag. Habits of a journalist who never stopped carrying tools. She hugged me like she had in college. No pretense, just the same easy closeness. There was relief in that. One familiar person who remembered the girl I'd been before, marriage rewrote my name like it was a budget item. We spread the documents across the desk. Ruth Ann read fast, head tilted, eyes narrowing. She flipped pages like a detective and then stopped on a cluster of invoices. "Look at this," she said. "Transfers to an account with an alias, wire after wire. And this, authorization slips signed by a Harold Crane representative and co-signed by a Derek Shaw." My hands felt suddenly foreign. The letters trembled under my fingertips. I could see the pattern now, faint but ugly, siphoning funds over years, disguised as supplier payments, consulting fees, phantom invoices. Derek had constructed a paper trail that painted him as the partner, then used it to funnel money out of the company into his own ventures. He hadn't only taken money, he'd built himself on it. "It's generational fraud," Ruth Ann said, her voice low. "This isn't a case of a husband hiding a checkbook. This is laundering family trust into a private empire." My first instinct, I won't pretend it wasn't there, was to walk away. That old voice in my head, the one that had learned to smooth edges and avoid storms, whispered that quiet would heal things faster than headlines. I could let the document sit in a drawer, sell the warehouse quietly, and slip back into a life where the angry words were said and soon forgotten. Ruth Ann slammed a folder closed. "No," she said firmly. "Peace doesn't come from silence. Peace comes from truth." Her phrase hit something in me I hadn't acknowledged, that I had been taught to make peace by being invisible. My grandfather's advice about outlasting storms, about quiet endurance, had always come with a soft warning. Endure, yes, but not to the point of self-erasure. I wrapped the handkerchief around the stack of documents. It felt ceremonial, wrong in a way that fit. The white fabric, my grandfather's initials stitched in blue, kept the papers together like a bandage. I thought of the way he'd pressed it into my hand that day in his kitchen. A small gesture passed like a family heirloom, and a warning folded into cloth. "This isn't about the building," I told Ruth Ann. "It's about my name, about what they tried to tell the world I was." She looked at me for a long moment. "Then we do this carefully. If you want me to publish, we time it. We prepare people. We protect you." There was a professional ache in her voice, old instinct. She wanted the story to be clean, to land true. I wanted something else, to feel like I wasn't running from the things I loved because someone else decided they had the right to rewrite them. We worked until the light thinned. Ruth Ann made calls, scanned documents with the scanner in the main office, typed notes into a phone app like she was building a case, piece by piece. I watched her move and felt, for the first time in a long while, less alone. Then the phone buzzed again. Derek's name flashed on the screen like a threat that refused to be polite. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was calm, too calm, like the man who'd once coached me on how to present at company dinners. "You think you found something, Maribel?" he asked, a slow smile I could almost hear. "Be careful. People make mistakes when they act out of spite." "You lied to me," I said, because my instincts weren't all thoughtful and graceful. They were the same ones that had gotten me through parent-teacher conferences and bad nights with a toddler. You stole from my family. There was a pause, like a measured breath. You don't understand the business, Maribel. You never have. You should pack your things and move on. This isn't worth it. Then the line clicked dead. I stared at the screen, heart flattening into a gag. It was a mockery of an apology, or a threat. Ruth Ann zipped her bag closed. He's running scared, she said, but if he's capable of this, he won't stop at words. We had barely started to process that when the lights in the office flickered and died. At first I thought it was the storm playing tricks, but the sky outside held only the borrowed blue of late afternoon. The warehouse hummed, then dropped to a low, uneasy silence. The scanner whirred and then stopped. The lamp on the desk went dark. We were private in a way that made my skin prickle. From downstairs came the faintest sound. A footstep, as sure as a heartbeat, not the slow, mechanical creak of settling floorboards, a human stride. I moved toward the stairwell automatically, Ruth Ann at my shoulder, both of us listening. The fluorescent emergency lights kicked on, bathing the room in a flat glow that let shadows live at the edges. Someone else was in the building, I said, voice small and steady. My breath felt loud in my ears. We stood there, the three of us, me, my daughter, and my friend, surrounded by proof that someone had tried to bury us, and now the past was stepping out of its hiding place. After Ruth Ann left that night, I locked every door in the warehouse. The rain had started again, softer this time, like it was thinking about something. The windows rattled, and somewhere outside, the wind dragged a loose sheet of tin across the pavement. It sounded almost like breathing. I checked on Eleanor one last time. She was asleep upstairs, curled up under a blanket, her tiny hand gripping the corner of her stuffed rabbit. The glow from my phone flashlight traced the soft outline of her face. I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and whispered, "You're safe, baby. I promise." The promise tasted like fear. Downstairs, the air was colder. The hum I'd heard in the underground level was gone. In its place came another sound. Quiet, deliberate footsteps. They weren't echoes. They weren't my imagination. I wasn't afraid of ghosts anymore. I was afraid of the living. I turned off the light on my phone for a moment, just to listen. The steps stopped too. The silence pressed in like a weight. My pulse hammered in my throat, and for a moment I thought about calling Ruth Ann back. But I knew better. Derek's world thrived on fear. And if I was going to make it out of this mess, I needed to stop feeding it. I gripped my flashlight tighter, switched it back on, and moved toward the stairs leading down to the underground floor. The beam of light jittered with my heartbeat, slicing through the darkness in sharp, shaky arcs. Halfway down, I caught the sound of a breath that wasn't mine. A slow exhale, controlled. When I reached the bottom, I saw him, standing near my grandfather's desk, hands in his coat pockets like he owned the place. The light hit his face, and I recognized him instantly. Miles Keaton, Derek's assistant. The one who used to call me Mrs. Shaw, like it was a title he wished he could revoke. "You weren't supposed to find this place," he said quietly. His tone was polite, almost gentle, but his eyes were scanning everything. The shelves, the ledgers, the wrapped stack of documents on the desk. "What do you want, Miles?" I asked. He stepped closer, the floor groaning under his weight. "I'm here to collect something that doesn't belong to you. Company property. You've got records that could cause misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," I repeated. "That's one way to describe theft." His mouth twitched, just slightly. "This can end easy, Maribel. Give me what you found, and we'll make sure Derek doesn't press charges. You don't want your daughter dragged into this, do you?" For a second, the room shrank. I could hear the rain against the metal roof again, faster, harder. It almost drowned out the sound of my own breathing. I thought of my grandfather's words, the ones I'd dismissed for years. Some storms you don't fight. You outlast them. So I stayed quiet, completely quiet. The silence unnerved him more than shouting would have. He shifted his weight, his voice rising slightly. I'm not here to hurt you, but if you make this difficult... I raised my phone and hit record. The small red light glowed in the dark. You should leave now, Miles, before this turns into evidence number 2. His face went pale. He didn't expect that. For a moment, I saw what fear looked like in a man who thought he controlled everything. He snatched the nearest box of ledgers from the desk, knocking over an old lantern. It clattered to the ground and sparked. The brief flare of flame reflected off his face, wild, desperate. Then it died, leaving behind only the faint smell of smoke. "Be careful, Maribel," he said, backing toward the door. "You have no idea who you're up against." And then he was gone, the metal door slamming shut behind him. The room was dark again. My flashlight beam swept across the floor, past the overturned lantern, and landed on the desk. The handkerchief sat there, white, unburned, wrapped around the key. The small flame had licked at its edges but hadn't touched it. Even in chaos, that small white cloth looked untouched, like it refused to burn. I sat there for a while, the silence pressing against me again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate, strong. By the time I climbed back upstairs, the rain had quieted. I checked on Eleanor again. She stirred in her sleep, murmuring, "Is Daddy mad at us?" I knelt beside her and whispered, "He's about to be." That was the moment I realized I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't the woman who froze at every harsh word or apology that came too late. I was something else. When dawn came, I made coffee on a small electric burner I'd found in one of the supply crates. The warehouse smelled faintly like rain and old metal. I felt tired but alert, alive in a way I hadn't in years. My phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened the message. "If you don't stop digging, you'll lose more than the house." Attached was a photo of my car, taken from across the street, taken that night. I stared at it until the image blurred. My heart didn't race this time. It slowed, steady, cold. "So," I whispered, "they were watching." I walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and watched the pale sun rise over Houston. The city looked washed clean, indifferent, alive. "Good," I said quietly. "Let them." A week later, I was standing in downtown Houston, folder in hand, walking past a marble statue of blind justice that had probably seen more truth buried than uncovered. The sky above was bright but soulless, too clean for everything that weighed beneath it. For the first time, I wasn't walking away from a fight. I was walking toward one. The courthouse lobby smelled like floor wax and nerves. I took the elevator up to the 6th floor, the folder pressed tight to my chest. Inside were my grandfather's documents, the very ones Derek and his people wanted to keep in the dark. Ledgers, original contracts, handwritten notes from a man who built something honest and got used as a stepping stone. Harvey Denton was waiting in his office, older than I remembered, glasses thicker, his voice slower, but his eyes still sharp. He stood when I walked in, not out of politeness, but respect. "You've got your grandfather's walk," he said. I sat across from him and laid the folder on his desk. "I've also got his mess." He flipped through the pages in silence. I watched his expression shift. Nostalgia, concern, disbelief. Then something else. Calculation. "You understand, Maribel. This is enough to open a federal case." I nodded. Calm. "Then let's start by opening his eyes." Harvey leaned back in his chair, exhaled deeply, then outlined our next step. Not court. Not yet. The first strike would come through Ruth Ann's article, supported by audits and a few well-placed financial inquiries. No headlines with Derek's name yet, but enough to shake the ground he walked on. "Expose the termites," he said, and the whole house starts to creak. On my way out, I passed a glass wall that reflected a version of me I barely recognized. Slower walk, stronger spine. For a second, I could almost hear Derek's voice in my head. "You'll never survive without me." I didn't answer out loud. I didn't need to. The answer lived in my silence. Maybe I never needed to. There was a small cafe down the block. I stopped in and took the table by the window. Same spot I used to sit in when I'd wait for Derek to finish his power lunches, back when I thought loyalty meant silence. I pulled out the handkerchief, unwrapped the key and the stack of documents. In the sunlight, I noticed the faint initials in the corner, MC, embroidered in thread that had faded but not failed. I used to think it stood for the name he gave me. Now I know it stands for the woman I became. By mid-afternoon, Ruth Ann's article had gone live. A teaser headline, "The Forgotten Heir and the Hidden Empire." It didn't name Derek, but anyone close to that world would know exactly who it pointed to. My phone started buzzing. Texts, missed calls, email pings one after the next. I didn't look at any of them until the voicemail icon lit up. One message, from Derek. His voice came through cold and sharp. "You're making a mistake. I can end you in court." I saved the voicemail, labeled it, filed it. Do it. The truth will stand longer than your lies. The sun was dipping low by the time I walked back to the warehouse. The streetlights were flickering on, the breeze heavy with that sweet, damp smell after a week of off-and-on storms. The warehouse still didn't have power, but something about the place felt changed, like it had exhaled finally, like it had been waiting for someone to listen. I stepped inside and immediately sensed something was off. Nothing obvious, but my skin pulled tight around my shoulders. A shift in the air, maybe. I passed the office and caught it out of the corner of my eye. A dark smear on the concrete near the vault door. Fresh mud, still wet. Someone had been inside. I dropped my bag, walked slowly toward it. The smear led away from the door, then stopped. Like they'd wiped it with a rag, tried to cover their tracks, but didn't realize how sharp I'd gotten at noticing the details people miss. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I whispered to myself, not out of fear, but certainty. If they want a war, they've just found their battlefield. The morning after the warehouse, I didn't sleep. I laid on the small couch in my rented apartment, my back aching, my mind racing. The air was still, thick with that post-rain smell of damp concrete and coffee grounds. Houston always held its breath before a storm came back. And that morning, it wasn't the sky I was watching, it was the screen of my phone. Buzz. Then again. By the third alert, I sat up. Breaking. Derek Shaw under investigation for alleged misuse of funds connected to the late Harold Crane's estate. I stared. It felt like someone had ripped the floor from under my feet and handed me wings instead. Ruth Ann had done it. Her article spread like wildfire. I could already hear the whispers in courthouse elevators, across lunch counters in oil exec diners, in the break rooms of banks named after men like Derek. And then, just as fast, the burn. Estranged wife involved in inheritance scandal. Insider claims mental instability. I didn't breathe, just watched as the world flipped the story on its head. He'd been prepared. I should have expected that. A live broadcast came next. Derek, smooth as always, in that gray suit he wore when he wanted to look like a man of the people, humble, respectable, rehearsed. His eyes shimmered just the right amount. If I hadn't known better, I'd have believed him myself. "My wife has been through a lot," he said, his voice low and dripping with performative empathy. "I just hope she gets the help she needs. This isn't her fault. Trauma does strange things." I didn't throw the phone. I didn't curse. I just smiled. The same kind of smile my grandfather wore when his competitor's car mysteriously broke down the morning of a major bid, and he happened to be holding the only working pen in the room. He just told the world his version, I whispered. Now it's my turn. That evening, the air in the warehouse felt tighter. Ruth Ann and Harvey arrived just after sundown. Ruth was holding her laptop, still open. Harvey looked older than I remembered, but his eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. He didn't waste time. If we can prove the signature on this partnership, form predates Harold's death. We've got him, he said, spreading out the papers on the metal desk. But we need the original notary file. My guess is it's in Miles Keaton's hands. He's been Derek's shadow for years. Ruth crossed her arms. So, what's the plan? Break into their offices? I looked at her and shook my head. No, I'm going in the front door. Maribel, you can't just walk into the lion's den. I folded the handkerchief slowly, smoothing the creases, pressing the initials, MC, with my thumb. I built that den, I said. I know its weak spots. That night, the city wore its humidity like armor. I pulled my hair back, zipped up the black dress that hadn't seen daylight since Derek's award banquet 3 years ago, and stepped into the lobby of Shaw Industries. The gala was already in full swing. Champagne flutes, strategic networking, artificial laughter. I moved like water. Quiet, patient, inevitable. One man blinked when he saw me. Another turned his shoulder. Then Derek spotted me. He froze. His smile died a quick death. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Just saying goodbye." I walked past him, straight to the legacy exhibit, a glittering shrine built on lies. Harold's blueprints were framed beside fake quotes, his picture stamped with Shaw Industries' logo like a corporate tattoo. I lifted my phone and recorded everything. "When you steal from the dead," I murmured, "the living remember." I turned to leave, but Miles was already waiting backstage, face tight with panic, one hand twitching toward my phone. "Delete it, Maribel. You don't know what you're doing." I stepped closer. The air between us felt like glass. "You've been hiding things for him since the beginning," I said, voice steady. "But digital trails don't drown in rain." I held out a flash drive. "It's not what you think, but it's enough for the authorities to start asking you uncomfortable questions." He took it, hand shaking, then looked over my shoulder. Security was approaching. Before they reached me, I walked to the display. I pulled the handkerchief from my purse, unfolded it, and laid it across the photo of my grandfather. This is the true name that built this empire. I didn't run. I walked out as slow and quiet as I came in. Outside, the rain had started again. Soft, rhythmic, almost like applause. By the time I reached the curb, Ruth Ann called, "You just made history." I looked up at the rain, let it hit my skin without flinching. "Not yet," I said, "but I just made him sweat." Then another ping, an email from Harvey Denton. Subject line, urgent. The body read, "The notary just confessed, but he's gone missing." I felt the cold hit first in my stomach, then rise like fog into my chest. "They're cleaning house," I said aloud, and I knew the next name on their list was mine. By the time morning came, I was already dressed and waiting. I hadn't closed my eyes once. Outside, the sky sagged with thick gray clouds, like the whole city was holding its breath again. Rain tapped at the warehouse windows, soft, steady, and constant, a kind of rhythm I'd grown used to. But this morning, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a clock counting down. I sat at the desk with my laptop open. A single message blinked on the screen. "Notary found. Coming to you with Klein." Harvey had kept it short, but it was enough. Behind me, Ruth Ann adjusted the camera on the tripod. She'd borrowed it from a local college journalism student she'd mentored years ago. Now it was trained on the desk where truth had finally started to gather. "This is it," I said softly. Ruth didn't look up. She was checking levels, focus, backup audio, always the professional. "The moment silence becomes evidence," I added. She glanced over her shoulder and gave me a small nod. An hour later, a knock. I opened the side door and found Harvey standing beside a tall woman in a dark blazer. No smile, no small talk. Her name tag clipped to her jacket read, "Detective Nora Klein." Klein handed me a manila envelope, thick, sealed, and stamped. I peeled it open carefully like it might break apart if handled too fast. Inside, a notarized affidavit, time-stamped documents, financial logs and email printouts, a copy of a sworn confession from the notary. Harvey's voice cut through the silence. "It's airtight. The signature Derek used to claim Harold's assets was post-dated. It's fraud, Maribel, clear as day." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "So now what?" Before Harvey could answer, headlights flashed through the rain-fogged windows. A black sedan pulled to a stop. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Derek stepped out with a black umbrella and that same smug expression I'd once mistaken for confidence. He didn't rush. He strolled in, like he still owned the place. "You could have just asked me, Maribel," he said, as he crossed the threshold, drops of rain glistening on his collar. I met his eyes. "You could have told the truth." The rain grew louder, like it was eavesdropping. He turned to the table, saw the documents, the camera, the detective. "You took my daughter," he snapped. "You took my company. You took my name, my reputation." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "No, Derek, you took everything that was never yours to begin with." He reached for the stack of papers, but Klein stepped in, her badge already raised. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "I suggest you take a seat. You're under investigation for financial fraud, coercion, and obstruction." He laughed. Sharp, loud, bitter. The kind of laugh a man uses when he's slipping and wants to pretend he meant to fall. "You think this ends me?" he barked. "That warehouse is worthless." I didn't respond. I turned instead, walked toward the back office, and flipped a switch. The overhead lights roared to life across the factory floor. For the first time in years, the place was glowing again. Brand new machines lined the walls. Polished equipment, restored from rust and memory. At the far end, a hand-painted sign gleamed under fluorescent light. Crane Manufacturing. Ruth Ann tilted the camera to catch the reveal. "I've been working with the local Veterans Job Training Program," I said quietly. "We start full operations in 2 weeks." Derek stared, not with anger this time, but disbelief. It was the first time I'd seen him speechless. I walked back to the desk. The handkerchief lay near the affidavit, faintly damp from a leak in the roof. I picked it up, flattened it gently with my palm. "You tried to drown me, Derek, but you forgot. I learned how to breathe underwater." "That did it?" He lunged. Eyes wild, mouth open, arms grabbing for the documents like a man falling off a cliff. Detective Klein and Harvey stepped in before he got within reach. She cuffed him as he shouted about setups, sabotage, betrayal, but the camera caught it all. His unraveling, his panic, his end. As they led him toward the door, I didn't move. I didn't shout, didn't celebrate. I just stood still, hand resting lightly on that old cloth, and watched. Ruth leaned in, her voice barely audible over the hum of the camera. "That's going to be one hell of a headline." I looked at her, finally letting my body relax for the first time in weeks. "Let it just say," I whispered, "justice didn't need to shout." That night, the warehouse sounded different. The machines buzzed gently. Not from secrets this time, but from promise. The kind of sound that feels like something beginning. Eleanor sat beside me at the window, her little finger tracing patterns into the foggy glass. She paused, then slowly drew a small heart. Inside it, she wrote 2 letters. MC. Is that for me? I asked. She nodded. You said it stands for strong girls. I smiled, letting the warmth of that moment soak deeper than any storm could wash away. Maybe this was always meant to happen. He buried me in the rain, but my roots found the light. 2 months later, the rain came again. But this time, I didn't flinch. It had been a warm morning, the kind that made the air smell like fresh-cut wood and second chances. The warehouse hummed softly with life, sunlight spilling through the skylights and dancing across polished concrete floors. Somewhere near the back, a child's laughter drifted through the open office window. Clear, easy, unburdened. They said the warehouse was empty. I see it now. It was just waiting for someone to fill it again. The headlines came and went. Shaw pleads guilty to financial misconduct, sentenced to 3 years. I didn't cut the article out. I didn't pour wine or call Ruth to celebrate. I just folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer alongside old receipts and closing statements. No need to gloat, no room for vengeance. Justice isn't about winning, it's about stopping the cycle. Later that week, I sat across from Harvey Denton in his modest downtown office. He slid the final transfer documents across the table and handed me a pen. Everything tied to Harold Crane's name. It's yours now. The warehouse, the land, even the patents. You did it, Maribel. He paused, smiled gently. Harold would have been proud. You didn't fight like him. You fought smarter. I signed, steady-handed. I just stopped fighting on their terms. By nightfall, I found myself alone in the warehouse office again. Not lonely, just quiet. I opened one of the old crates Ruth helped me bring down from storage last week. Inside, still wrapped in yellowed tissue, were letters my grandfather had written but never mailed. Some addressed to my mother, some to me. One caught my eye, the simple lines scrawled on the back of an envelope. A legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we repair before we go. I don't remember crying exactly. It was more like something softened and let go. A knot that had lived in my chest for too long finally unraveled. The handkerchief still lay on the corner of my desk, folded carefully as always. This time, I didn't reach for it. I let it rest there, untouched, complete. It no longer held the weight of everything I'd lost. It had done its job. The door creaked open behind me. Mom? Eleanor's voice had changed lately. Still soft, but with more certainty. More hers. She walked in holding a small terracotta pot with a bright green sprout stretching up from dark soil. I grew it at school, she said. Can we plant it here? Grandpa's warehouse should have something alive. We found a spot near the side door. The same one I'd once stumbled through, soaked, shaking, ashamed. She dug the hole with her bare hands. I pressed the roots down gently. As we packed the soil back in, I looked up. Rain was falling again. Not hard, just enough to patter softly on the roof, to carry the smell of earth and metal through the air. Do you remember that night? Eleanor asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. I brushed the dirt off my fingers. I remember, I said, but it doesn't hurt anymore. A few days later, Ruth Ann dropped by. She always brought coffee, black, hot, and exactly how I liked it, even if I forgot to say. She looked around, eyes scanning the busy workshop, where veterans repaired engine parts and single moms took welding lessons on the weekends. So, she said, sipping, what's next, Mrs. Crane? I raised a brow. Not Mrs. Shaw anymore, just me, and that's enough. The warehouse didn't echo like it used to. Not with ghosts, not with guilt. Now it echoed with purpose, with laughter, with new beginnings. As Ruth left, a breeze pushed in through the open window. It lifted the handkerchief ever so slightly, like it wanted to take flight. Then it floated gently back down, landing flat and still. The embroidered initials shimmered under the golden light. MC. Not a reminder of what I lost. A mark of who I'd become. They threw me out into the rain to make me break. But the rain didn't break me. It washed me clean. Some storms come to destroy. Mine came to reveal who I was. Outside the warehouse, a new sign hung over the entry gate, crafted by hand, painted by Ruth's nephew, sealed with time, Crane Foundation, built from the storm. I didn't inherit a warehouse. I inherited a second chance.